Welcome to Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an endurance athlete journey podcast series. I'm your coach for this journey, and if triathlon has ever felt confusing, intimidating, or out of reach, that's exactly why this series exists. You don't need to be fearless, you don't need to have perfect fitness, and you definitely don't need to have everything figured out yet. What you need is a clear plan, honest guidance, and the confidence that comes from taking the right steps in the right order. In this series, we'll strip away the hype, focus on smart progression, and help you build confidence before distance, so that triathlon fits into your life, not the other way around. Whether this is your first race or your first time even considering one, you're in the right place. Let's get to work. Welcome back, everyone, to Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon. This is episode 4 in our series, and today we're going to be talking about a common concern that I get from beginners is, can I even train for a triathlon with my busy schedule? Now, I understand that this is a valid concern. We're all limited by the same 24 hours in a day, right? But not everybody's 24 hours are structured the same way. We all have different demands on our time. And so I can understand why this is a concern for some. These days, we keep ourselves busy, running here and there, trying to fit in a sport which contains 3 different disciplines can feel overwhelming before you even start. And so I think that this is one of the things that keeps people from trying a triathlon, is because they see this as, I just don't have, 12, 14, 15 hours to dedicate to training for a triathlon. So I'm just going to quell that fear right now. There's absolutely no reason why a beginner would need that much time to dedicate to triathlon. Now, that does not mean as you progress in your journey that those types of training weeks would become common or necessary. But as a beginner, there's no way that is the quote unquote norm. So you do not need all of this time. You don't need unlimited time. You don't need to have a demand-free life in order to dedicate time to training. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the realistic time requirements that would be needed at a minimum to just get started in the sport. We'll talk also about why training more isn't necessarily always better. Now, I'll be honest with you that sometimes I personally have struggled with this in my own journey, and we'll talk about why that is the case sometimes. We'll also cover some of the common mistakes that I see new athletes making. And quite honestly, these are mistakes that some experienced athletes make. So I wanted to bring them to the forefront now so that you are aware of what these mistakes are, and hopefully you can keep from making those same ones. All right. I'm going to give you a simple weekly structure that will get you started. So I'm going to present to you an 8-week training plan that will get you started and prepared for a sprint triathlon. This is going to be a very simple plan, no frills, very basic plan that will get you on the road. Now, this comes with caveats that, these types of plans are not geared towards you individually, right? You specifically. Because I don't know what your strengths are. I don't know what your weaknesses are. And that's where a coach really comes in handy. Working with somebody who has that experience to cater a plan based on your time constraints, your strengths, your weaknesses, your injury histories, all these other things that you have to consider when forming a plan. And sometimes it's just easier to kind of turn that over to somebody else who's either had the experience or the training to know how to do that effectively without making you feel burnt out by the end of the process and just ready to give up before you even get started. I'll also cover 2 scenarios that I think are the most common ones that I see coaching adult athletes. And those will be individual case studies that we can talk about just briefly. I'll give you some tips and pointers on how to accommodate those particular lifestyles so that you too can start your journey and finally start to see that you're capable of way more than you think that you are. So let's get started. And we're going to talk about the first topic on how much time do we actually need, right? For a sprint, we covered some of this in the first episode of this series where we were talking about picking a race distance. So in that episode, we talked about how a sprint triathlon is one that I would recommend most beginners to start with. The caveat to that was an Olympic could be an appropriate starting point if you already have a solid introduction and you have some fitness in one or more of the three disciplines that are tied to triathlon: swim, bike, and run. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's just talk about the sprint. Honestly, what we're talking about is a minimum plan of, let's say, 4 to 5 hours per week, right? That's nothing. Honestly, I think most of us could find 4 to 5 hours in a week now, spanning 7 days, just the time that we spend scrolling on our phone. So for some fraction of the time that you spend on your phone, you could actually accomplish the training and the completion of a sprint triathlon. Very, very simple. We're talking 2 to 3 runs, maybe 2 bikes, 2 swims. I recommend 2 swims just because that is the one discipline that's in triathlon that most beginners either have some fear over, some anxiety over, and it's the most technical of the 3. So I do recommend doing 2 swims per week for a beginner. Now, if you log in and you search on the web for, free training plans, a lot of those are just going to have you doing 1 swim per week. So I like to have my athletes a little bit more prepared for the swim, because when you start your day out in a better position, the rest of the day seems easier. So that's why I recommend that. Now, for an Olympic, we just bump up those minimum times just slightly. I'm talking anywhere between 5 to 8 hours per week is what I personally would recommend. Now, this is going to be a function of, your injury history, whether you have that type of a time available, which I think still most of us do. I think that we can still find over the span of 7 days, an hour a day is what that effectively boils down to. Some of your training sessions are going to be a little bit longer than they would be in the sprint. There's more of a weekend focus for an Olympic versus a sprint in order to get a little bit of a longer run done, a little bit of a longer bike, because you're talking about increasing the bike distance from 12 miles to 25 miles from the jump up from a sprint to an Olympic. So a 25-mile bike ride is significantly different than a 12-mile. So you have to shift some of that stuff to the weekends. But if you have a work schedule where your weekends are spent doing other things, you work weekends or whatnot, that doesn't mean that you can't have these longer sessions during the week, or you can fit them in where they're a little bit easier for you to manage. I'm just saying, by and large, on average, most people have a heavier weekend focus for an Olympic triathlon, just because that tends to be the time where we have most available. I would suggest jumping up from 2 bikes per week to 3 bikes per week for an Olympic, just to build a little bit more fitness. And but we're not talking like 15 to 20 hour week of training. Now, if you wanted to step up to a half Ironman, up to a full Ironman, then yeah, that's when we're talking about, anywhere between 15 to 22 can be an average training week. When you're starting to get into those higher numbers, you're starting to talk about in that phase of your training plan where you've got the biggest volume, which is what we call the peak phase of our training plan. But That's not what we're talking about here. And that's not what you're focused on as a beginner. We're focused on sprints and at most an Olympic. So let's just throw that misconception of 15 to 20 hours right out the window, and let's settle on somewhere between 4 to 8 for a average week. And knowing that, as you get closer to your race day and as you start to progress that training plan, you can start to dabble into that higher range, but it's not necessary. We can keep these workouts fairly simple so that there's nothing complex about it, nothing overwhelming about it, but you will be prepared when you jump into that water, and you'll know what's coming, what's ahead, and there'll be no surprises for you, right? What I want to focus on and reiterate that I've been talking about in every single episode of this series, as well as most of the podcast episodes that we talk about with the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, is that we are more focused on consistency over volume. Now, I want to make sure, since this is a beginner series, I want to make sure that you understand what volume means, right? So training volume is going to be things like your total miles, either biked or ran and swim in aggregate, so over the span of the whole week. Or if you're talking about in minutes, how many minutes are you working out or hours are you working out during the week? That's what I mean by volume, right? So I'm more concerned over you accomplishing those run-of-the-mill, normal weekday workouts, and you're just checking the box, check the box. I'm more impressed with something like that. And I think that pays more dividends in being prepared on race day than having these epic workouts where, you're out there for 2 hours or whatever. That stuff is just not necessary. And it doesn't lead to greater fitness, because fitness is a cumulative process. Do you get fitness bumps from big training sessions? Yes, you clearly do. But a fitness bump is not the same thing as accumulating fitness day after day after day. That trend starts to rise up and up and up and up and up. That's way better than flatline, spike, and then it starts to decline a little bit because you can't sustain that kind of volume over time. So it actually starts to come back down and trend back towards that baseline again. And that's where you get these weekend warrior kind of mentalities, where it's just like very little is done and then spiked, and then it comes back down again, maybe not all the way back down, but it starts to trend back down and then spike. And what that does, it just generally leads to burnout. It can lead to overuse injuries because you're shocking the body so much that it doesn't know how to respond. You are in a much better position by slowly accumulating this training volume over time so that your body has time to adapt and generate strength, generate power over time, rather than forcing it to try and adapt to big shots at one time. So it just doesn't work that way. So I hope that this has alleviated a little bit of your concern, or maybe you're wondering, it's like, can I do this? Right now we're looking 4 to 5 hours for a sprint, which there's 7 days. So that means that you're not training every single day. It doesn't mean that you can't train every single day or do something every single day of the week, but at a minimum, you don't have to. So let's talk about why more isn't always better. So I'll be completely honest with you. This is something that I have struggled with over my journey as well as an athlete. I'm much better at it in managing my athletes' training volume than sometimes I am managing my own. It's really hard to wear the coaching hat and the athlete hat at the same time. Sometimes, as we start to think, so, I'm stronger than I really am, or, hey, I can handle that. But, that's kind of gets us into some sticky situations sometimes. And I'm speaking from personal experience. So, it's something that I've experienced over time as well, and something that I'm still actively working on improving. So it's this misconception that if I train more, I'll be better prepared, right? And we kind of alluded to this a little bit before in the previous section where we talked about, how much time. Training more doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be better prepared. There is a diminishing return or diminishing marginal return for each additional training hour that you stack on after a certain point. It doesn't mean that you can't get fitter and get better prepared by increasing training volume, because that's what we do. That's what a periodized training plan does. It starts at a baseline level, and then we slowly accumulate more and more and more. So we are training more, but there comes a point where you reach a threshold where each additional hour that you're training yields less and less benefit to you. And absolutely, there is a point where you add an additional hour or additional, 30 minutes to your training, your fitness actually starts to decline. And that's because your body is unable to absorb that stress. And when it can't absorb it, it starts to shut it down, and, you can't recover. And that's when you start to get hurt. So training more doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be better prepared for race day. Training responsibly, proper sequencing of your workouts, proper rest and recovery, proper nutrition, those are the things that make you better prepared for race day. And so I just named off, 4 or 5 things that are not training related at all that can actually make you better prepared. Another thing that I see that's common with athletes, and I'll get messages from my own athletes as well, is like, hey, I missed this workout today. Can I add it to another, to some day in the future? So eventually, you start to, what you do is you see Monday through Sunday on your training week, and now you've missed all these workouts. So now Saturday and Sunday get jam packed with all these skipped workouts. So now you got, a 5-hour bike ride because you missed all your bike workouts. That's not how this works, right? So a missed workout is a missed workout. Unless you have a situation where you can reasonably move it to another day because the other things that you're doing on that day are not engaging the same primary muscle groups. So, if you have a swim earlier in the week and you miss that swim, can you move it to a day where you do a run? Absolutely. Because they're different muscle engagements. Run, high impact, high demand on the body. Swimming, low to no impact on the body. It's a full body workout though, but there's no impact to it. So you can pair those two together. And it's common to pair run and swims on the same day as you start to progress along your journey, and you start to need more and more sessions each week in order to be properly prepared. So it is common to have 2 workouts a day, but you're not at that level right now. That's not a concern. So if you're moving along in your training plan and you have a missed workout, my suggestion to you would be leave it. It's a missed workout, but it's fine. It's not going to completely upend your performance or your preparation for race day. Now, there's a caveat. When you start to consistently miss sessions, now we're talking that we may have to adjust our expectations for race day and our expectations for the preparedness that we want to feel for race day. But that's only if you've consistently missed sessions. But a missed session here and there because life got in the way or you weren't feeling fully recovered, and there's going to be times where you are sore. So there's a difference between being sore and injured. So soreness is fine, but we want the body to absorb and recover. And if you get to a point where it's just like, hey, I've got this workout for this day, my body's really kind of feeling a little beat up. I had a really stressful day at work and I'm working out in the evening. I don't know if I can execute this kind of structure of the workout. Can I just get on the bike and just ride easy? Absolutely. There's a little bit of freedom and leeway that you have in your training plan, and that should be built into it. But Honestly, as a beginner, I rarely will give beginner athletes structured workouts, which means that I'm not giving you guys like intervals to do, like a defined interval structure, or ride hard for, 3 minutes and then, ride easy for a minute. I rarely give new athletes that kind of structure because what we're more interested in is just getting comfortable in the sport that you're trying to be prepared for. So on that given day, we're going to be a cyclist, right? But we ride as a triathlete. So there's a difference with that. So, you know, I'm more interested in you becoming more comfortable on the bike, just pedaling at an effort that you can sustain and being more confident with handling a bike. If you want to ride with other people, getting comfortable riding with other people around you and not necessarily just riding all alone all the time or staying on an indoor trainer if you have one. So those are the things that I'm more concerned about. And I tend to focus more with beginner athletes. And so when we get to this episode, in the part of this episode where I give you that sample 8-week training plan, that's how I've structured that plan as well. No structure, actually. So, and my purpose as a coach for a beginner athlete is I'm responsible for putting you in situations that build your confidence, not necessarily build your performance. Now, as we continue to work together and we get stronger and better, and we start to now have expectations for ourselves, and now you say, I have a specific goal that I want to meet. Can you help me get there? And if it's a performance driven goal, there's like, a pace that you're trying to hit on the run or a particular speed or power that you're trying to get on a bike or just, improve your swim split, then, we'll start to talk about not necessarily focusing so much on confidence, but now starting to tailor the workouts towards a particular performance goal. But as a beginner, I recommend that you focus more on just building confidence and comfort before performance. Performance comes later. After you cross that finish line, that's when you can start talking about performance. Now you're saying, that was awesome. It was hard, but it felt great. What's next? That's the point where you can start maybe forming some expectations and kind of tweaking your training plan a little bit to generate a particular performance goal. But as I've said earlier, that we're not doing these epic workouts, right? So to be honest with you, as a new athlete, you should be focused more on just consistency, as I've said. So for you, 3 30-minute sessions are way better than one 90-minute session that feels chaotic and stressed and that you really are kind of dreading to do. So again, this idea of consistency, it's not that, we're doing these hard, big, epic things. We're just checking the box, 1 30-minute ride done. And now you can do another ride later in the week. And there's less stress on you. There's less anxiety, less pressure, because doing a 90-minute session is pressure filled as a beginner. And so, doing it in small bites is a little bit easier to tolerate and absorb. That's what you should be focused on as a new athlete. Now, let's start talking about how triathlon should fit into our lives. We talked a little bit about this in episode 1, where we were using some criteria to determine what race distance that we're going to pick. In that episode, I tend to focus more on like your history. Do you have any experience in any of these sports? Then those were kind of the criteria that we were using to pick our race. However, in this episode, let's focus it more on time. I have worked with an athlete for many years. He was one of my founding athletes that I started with when I first started the Tabula Rasa racing coaching business. And he has religiously stuck to sprints in Olympics. Now, he's an experienced athlete. He's done many races. He's comfortable in all three sports. And so I sat down with him one time and I was like, hey, are you thinking about stepping up to, a 70.3? Given your experience and your strengths and everything else, I think that you're ready to do this. Physically, you are ready. Experience-wise, you're ready to take on this effort. And he gave me a response that stuck with me. And he said, I want to stick with sprints and Olympics because it fits my life. He couldn't have said it any better. So even though he was physically able to tackle longer races, more intense training plans, he knew his limitation, and there are other things that he has to manage: family, kids, a demanding job, travel schedule, all kinds of other things that really do come into play. So before you hit that registration button, I want you to ask yourself 4 things. First thing is, we've talked about, is do I have 4 to 5 hours per week for consistent training? That's the first question. The second one is, can I balance 2 longer workouts on the weekends? So do I have the availability on the weekend to do longer training sessions? Now, that's a relevant question when it comes to deciding between a sprint and Olympic, because we said as an Olympic, it's more of a weekend focus. Some of your sessions are going to be longer. And do you have that availability? The third question is, am I getting enough sleep, and am I willing to protect it? So if you struggle with sleep and you're up late at night and you're up early in the morning, that's something that you need to consider, because we know that restorative sleep is necessary in order to repair the stress that we put on our body from training. So, what are your sleep habits like? Or is there anything that I can do as a coach to help you form a better sleep routine? Just something, if there's something that you've never thought of, then, us working together, I can help you formulate a nice sleep routine that gives you the quality and the duration that you need in order to repair and recover from races. But it takes a commitment to it. So are you willing to protect that sleep? Fourth one, and the final, is my family supportive of this goal? Now, if you're a single individual and you don't have any family responsibilities, you don't have to worry about this question at all. However, people that are either married or in committed relationships, this is something that you should consider and you should talk to your significant other about. Now, I will step back a little bit because now I'm just thinking about it. If you're a single person, but you have, an active social life where you're meeting with friends and things like that, there may be instances where you may not be able to go out drinking on a Friday night, and kind of unwind because you have a training session that you want to accomplish on Saturday and you want to be prepared and rested for that training session. So there may be a few sacrifices that you would have to make temporarily just during the training plan. But, are you willing to make that choice? If not, then maybe the Olympic isn't for you. Maybe you should opt for the sprint where there's a little bit more freedom in terms of your weekend allocation of time. But when I sit down with prospective athletes, I do try to sit down with their significant other as well. So both of them are sitting with me at the table, because when you start doing this, your support system is just as invested in the sport as you are. There are going to be times where, you have a workout to do, and, you may not be around for that time period where you usually are. So that's a sacrifice that they're making as well. Come race day, it's going to be an early morning day probably. And, it could be, they're sitting around at the race venue for a couple hours. That's a commitment and a sacrifice that your significant other makes. And so what I want to do when I sit down with prospective athletes is make sure that both of them are aware of kind of like what's going on, what could potentially be required. It's only going to be as required as you make it. So, um, but that is important because the training process becomes so much harder if you're having to fight your spouse or your significant other over it, and they just don't feel supportive, and it makes it harder to do. And so, it's something to consider. So if you answered no to two or more of those questions, then I would highly recommend that you consider the shorter distance to go with the sprint over the Olympic. But these aren't really thought-provoking, serious, like in-depth questions. These are fairly simple questions that you want to ask yourself and just make sure that you have a reasonable answer to, so that you pick the right distance of race that fits your life. And so you're not fighting life while you're training. It all kind of like fits together. So I think of it as like a jigsaw puzzle, right? We don't want to like jam these pieces into the puzzle. We want them to kind of fit. We have to find the right pieces to put them together, because not any piece just fits to any piece like in a normal jigsaw puzzle. And that's where a coach comes into play. They help you find the right pieces and in the right sequencing and put them together in order to create a better overall picture. So I think that this is a great starting point before you even click the registration button for trying to pick, what race kind of fits into my life. Like I said, we talked about in episode 1, where, we looked at some of our past and our experiences in the sport, and now we're kind of overlaying life on top of it to see how it really fits. So the next topic that I want to talk about is time management. Now, I think most of us can probably benefit from better time management. I know that I could, so I'll just speak for myself. But I think that there are about 4 common time management mistakes that I see committed by new triathletes. Some of them are actually committed by experienced athletes. So you are not unique in this situation. So let's talk about the first one. Is you're choosing too long of a race, because with that longer race comes more demanding training. And so what I've experienced working with athletes, especially adult athletes, is I'll give them a time to expect. So I say, in order to be prepared for this race, you can expect to commit anywhere between this number of hours to this number of hours. If I hear the response from them saying, I can probably make that work, I know right off the bat, it's too long of a race. We should step down, because I'm more interested in you feeling confident that you can execute the training for race day, because the training is spread over time. We're talking up to 8 weeks for a sprint, but race day is a single day. So I'm more interested in you enjoying that 8 weeks than what happens on race day. So I want you to feel confident that you have the ability to execute the training in order to be prepared. It doesn't mean that the training is going to be easy, and you don't have to be confident in terms of meeting some kind of like performance expectation, or, you're going to be swimming with perfect form, or, your run stride is textbook and all this kind of stuff. That's not even the case. But I just want you to feel confident that you have the time and the ability in your schedule to execute that plan. Number 2 is people ignoring their real schedule. So sometimes when I work with athletes that are parents, sometimes they tend to underestimate the time that they have to commit to kids' activities and all the other stuff that comes with managing children or managing a home. And so when you start to ignore that, it's time that you didn't account for, and now you start to feel like, man, now I don't have as much time as I thought I did. And now you start to stress about it, and you're starting to see missed workouts and everything else. And so everything just kind of like starts to fall apart. What I want to convey to my athletes and to new athletes is that take into account your work hours. Do you have a very demanding job, high stress job where, hours may be volatile? You may work, as a nurse or a factory worker in manufacturing where you can work up to like 12-hour shifts. And so you may be working 2 to 3 days on, or, and then 2 days off, and all these kinds of like very unique time schedules, which can make training more challenging than somebody who just works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Doesn't mean it's impossible, because with proper planning and, can still get it accomplished. You may not be able to do the same kind of training plan that somebody else could do that has a different schedule, but doesn't mean that you can't do a training plan. And that's where a coach will come into play to build you a plan that fits your demands and not just some plan that they found on the internet that fits the quote unquote average person, because you're not average. Your schedule isn't average. Do you have long commutes or high stress commutes? Those are another thing that you have to consider. And, like I said, the kids' activities, your sleep quality, and the amount of sleep that you can get. These are all things that we want to consider when we start to talk about what our real schedule is. Because once we understand our real schedule, then we know what time we have available. And so we can make that evaluation more informed on whether we do have the 4 to 5 hours per week to dedicate to training at a minimum for a sprint distance triathlon. And number 3 is believing that every workout has to be a long workout. You're not at a stage where you're doing 2-hour rides and 90-minute runs. We're not training for marathons and half marathons. We're not doing that. So, you don't have 2-hour rides. You have a 1-hour ride, or you have a, 45-minute run. Those are very doable for most. So we're not talking, long spans of time that you have to dedicate to training. It's not like that. And we'll start to talk about the concept of brick workouts, which is something unique to triathlon. And I'll talk about it a little bit when I give you this 8-week plan, and I'll introduce what a brick is and when I believe that it's appropriate in the training plan. So number 4 is letting one missed workout derail you completely. And this is something that I see quite often, actually. Let's say that you've made a New Year's resolution to go to the gym 6 days a week and rest on one day. Now you're making good progress, and then 1 week life gets in the way and you can only get to the gym 5 days rather than 6. You're just like, I just broke my New Year's resolution. Now what's the point? And so this is a very common thing that I see with athletes. And so what I want to reiterate to you is that one missed workout is not going to make or break your training plan. Consistently missing workouts is going to be an issue that we may have to talk about. But one workout here and there is not going to affect the big picture. So you accept it. It is a missed opportunity, but it's not going to ruin everything. So you accept it and you move on, and you just keep plugging away and do the best that you can. So I would say that we're not overloading workouts because we've missed them. So we're not moving things and stacking things in order to quote unquote get it in. That's not what I want for you as a new athlete. And this idea of perfection, of getting every single session done to the letter, isn't important at this stage of your journey. Like I said, we're preaching consistency over perfection every single time. It yields way better results for the new athlete. All right, so let's step into this sample plan that I've got for you guys. This is I built an 8-week training plan split into 2 blocks. So what I will do is I will post this sample plan on the Tabula Rasa Racing Instagram account. So if you're not following Tabula Rasa Racing, please consider finding us on Instagram, liking and following us there, and you'll find it there. It's also going to be in the companion blog that is tied to this episode. So if you go to tabularasaracing.com and you go to the Coach's Corner Library section of the page of the website, and you look up Triathlon 101, episode 4, and that's where the blog is for this. You'll see all kinds of different graphics and things that are illustrating what I'm talking about here. And in that document is going to be this beginner triathlete plan for a sprint. So in this plan, during weeks 1 through 4, so this is where we're going to build a little bit of a base. We're going to have 2 swims. We're going to have 2 runs, 2 bikes, and then one day we're going to have what I would call an optional rest, strength, or cross-training day. Nothing says that you have to take a day off. That is a big misconception in endurance sports. It's not necessary. Sometimes it's recommended, but your body typically will tell you when it needs it. And I'm a firm believer in that. There is benefit to what I would call active recovery. So we're stepping away from the 3 primary disciplines that we're preparing for, swim, bike, and run, and we do something else. For instance, I'll have an athlete get on the elliptical and we remove all of the impact, but we can still kind of replicate the run stride to a certain degree, and we work on muscle recruitment. And so we're working on quad engagement, hamstring and glute engagement, working on balance and arm swings are beneficial and can be considered as active recovery because you're getting your body to do something different. Sometimes I'll recommend an athlete just do like an easy strength day because I'm building strength workouts more and more into my athletes' training plans as well as my own, because I'm seeing the huge benefits that endurance athletes are getting by finally focusing on generating strength, generating power, and building muscle to a certain degree, but it yields big results and huge benefits, not only to your performance, but to your longevity and your durability in the sport. So I built one of those days into the week that's going to be an option for you if you want it. I have in there the time that you'll be either running or biking. We're not doing anything in miles. I do my training plans in minutes. So I say, we're going to run for, 30 to 40 minutes, or we're biking for, 45 minutes or something like that. For the swims, I say, we're swimming anywhere between, I think it's like 5 to 700 yards in the swim, which is completely doable. Yes, it is over and above the distance in which you'll have to swim, but you don't have to swim consistently for 500 yards. What I will typically do for an athlete is I'll just give them intervals. I'll say, hey, we're going to swim 4 by 50s, which means that you're going to swim 50 yards or 50 meters and then take 15 to 20 seconds break and then swim it again. And that's how you kind of like build this endurance in the water. You're starting to build comfort in the water. And by the end of, let's say, like 45 minutes, you've swam more than what you'll need to swim on race day, but we're building comfort in the water and an awareness for the water. And so right now we're not necessarily focusing on technique. I'm interested in getting you in and out of the water as efficiently and effectively as possible, given where you are in your journey right now. Now, when we start to step up from weeks 5 to 8, things are pretty much the same, with the exception that now I've bumped up your swim volume a little bit, because now we start to build this comfortability in the water. And now I have you swimming up to a max of about 1,000 yards or 1,000 meters in that session. Now we're not, like I said, we're not swimming 1,000 yards straight, right? There should be structure to it. Take as much recovery time as you need, but that's what we're going for. This is where we introduce the concept of a brick workout. Now, a brick workout is where you do two of the disciplines with a quick transition in one training session. Normally, this is a bike and run brick. So what we'll do is we'll jump on our bike, we'll do a bike ride, and then we're going to practice that transition of going from the bike to the run, just so that you know what it's going to feel like on race day. I don't typically include brick workouts throughout the entire training plan because I believe that there is a time and place for them. You do not gain aerobic capacity, like additional aerobic capacity, simply by running off the bike. Run is a run. A bike is a bike. Now, because you run after you bike doesn't mean that you've now gained more fitness. Now, what you have done is you've gained more experience, and now you've got this neuromuscular connection that you're trying to make, where your body is going from a seated position with a higher cadence and no impact to standing upright with impact. So it's going to feel weird and it's going to feel odd. And so the reason that I put these towards the tail end is where we start to get some race specific training. And I want to start to introduce this feeling to you so that you're not caught off guard. Am I expecting you to run off the bike with perfect? Absolutely not. That's not the point of it. And it's not the purpose for a beginner like you, where you are in your journey right now. I'm just trying to give you that experience so that you're not surprised on race day on how it's going to feel. You're like, oh, I know how it's going to feel. And so when you get off that bike, you're like, it feels just like it did in training. So no surprises. And I believe that sets you up for success on race day more than just doing bricks every single week. They can be complicated. They can be a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more stressful. And so I believe that there's a time and place for them. And I typically put them in the tail end of a training plan. So the key with this is that if you need to shorten something, shorten it. If I have 45-minute bike workout on that day, but you don't have 45 minutes, you have, 30 minutes, then do the 30 minutes. Doing the 30 minutes is better than doing no minutes at all. So just do something. Do what fits into the plan that you have available to you. Do not then take the minutes that you did not complete and add it to another workout. Those minutes are gone. So just say, I only had 30 minutes of this 45-minute workout, but the 15 minutes are gone. They're not going to make or break your race day. So just consider it done and over with and just execute the next workout on the plan. If you need to move something, move it. If it's complicated to get to the pool for a swim on a particular day, but you can do it on another day, then move it. What I typically will recommend athletes, and this is for when you start to become more advanced and you start to tackle longer and longer races, we start to pay more attention to the sequencing of the workouts. So I don't want to give you, a hard bike on one day followed by a hard run on the next. I might want to split those up a little bit so that your body doesn't have to try and recover from 2 hard sessions back to back. I typically, for a new athlete, I will not give them bikes and runs on the same day, other than when we start to get into the plan where we start to introduce bricks. But if you say, I don't have the availability to train on this day, but I can do, a swim in the morning and then a run in the evening on this day, then that's awesome. We'll do that. There's nothing that says that you can't. And those two particular kinds of work pair well together because you're not activating similar muscle groups. Now, if you said, I'm going to bike in the morning and then run in the evening, well, it depends on what intensity we're talking about. But since most of you guys are going to be beginners, the intensity just isn't there. And we're talking about just, fairly consistent, just relatively easy riding, may not be that much of a concern. But going forward, as you start to step up into longer and longer races, it is something that you need to consider, and something that a coach is really helpful with for that, in terms of sequencing and stacking on volume. For you as the beginner, the flexibility is part of sustainability. So if you can be flexible, then it's easier to keep going. This is something I'll be honest, I kind of struggle with a little bit in terms of my flexibility when I create my own plan, but it's something that I've gotten better with over the years. And where you guys are as beginners, I think it's really, really important to focus on that, so that you don't have to change that mindset when you are a little bit further down your road in your journey, and you kind of like get quote unquote, set in your ways. It's really hard to become flexible later. So if we can reinforce that behavior earlier, then I believe it sets you up for more success in the future. Check out the plan that's out there, and I hope that it will give you a good starting point. Again, I want to reiterate that this is a minimalist plan. So this is kind of what I would consider the minimum that you should be doing. Now, there is a maximum in which you should be doing, but I don't want to get into that right now. But I will say that if you start to get over and above that 5 hour threshold for a sprint triathlon and you're new, that's not something that I recommend. Now, if you are an experienced athlete who has been doing this for quite a while, you are really good at recovering, then I can say we can put on some additional volume, because maybe we're going to be training at some higher intensities. There's nothing wrong with going over and above our race distances at the sprint, because for the sprint, they're fairly short distances. So it's not like, we're riding a 56-mile bike workout for race day, and now during training, we're riding like 80 to 90 miles. That's not something that we're doing. Our race distance is 12 miles. So if you can get up to 12 miles, great. That's fine. If you can get over 12 miles and still stay within the time frame that we're looking at, that's perfectly reasonable as well. Don't go out and do 50 miles. That's not reasonable. So, this plan that I have here is what I'll call this minimalist plan. But if you want to talk about some tweaks to this plan, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you as much as I possibly can. If you're interested in saying, hey, I like this plan, but I have some unique situations, and, I have some particular injury histories. So what about coaching? Would you coach me through a sprint? Absolutely. I do that all the time, and I'm happy to do that and see how it is that I can help you move along in your journey. So I hope that's been helpful. Now, let's make all of this work with two real life scenarios that I've encountered as a coach for adult athletes. And that is, scenario one is parent with children. And then scenario two is somebody who travels for work. I believe that these are two fairly common scenarios that I see that can sometimes hinder you from pulling that trigger on signing up for a race. So I wanted to give you some ideas and some, I don't want to say tricks and tips, but these are some things that you can consider to make training fit into that lifestyle. And so let's start with the first one. Let's start with parents with children. Now, I'm a parent. I have two children. One's grown, one's growing, but he's still under my care. And so parenting can feel like a 24-hour responsibility. You're always on. Carving out time for yourself can sometimes bring on this sense of parenting guilt, that you're not completely available for that child whenever they, quote unquote, would need you or want you to be there. I get that. And I tend to see this more when I coach females than I do males. But during my training, and especially when I started to step up into higher distances, I was a single parent. And so I understand what this is like and managing those commitments and responsibilities while still making the time for yourself, because traveling this journey doesn't make you selfish. It makes you a stronger and more present parent. So I really hope that you'll sit on that one a little bit and saying, me taking this time for myself is not me thinking of myself, because your children will see what you're doing. They'll see you working hard for something. And I believe that that matters way more than you being there at their beck and call 24 hours a day whenever they want you to be there. I think that that is a great thing for your kids to see. And this isn't like it's permanent, right? You're not doing this 7 days a week, 365 a year. There's phases of the year in which you're doing it. So I believe this is completely doable. The first suggestion that I would have is consider training before the house wakes up. So set your alarm clock a little earlier, which may mean that you need to go to bed a little bit earlier. So before everybody wakes up, you take that time for yourself and get your training done. If it means that maybe if you are blessed to have a treadmill in your home, or somebody, if you have a bike trainer or somebody that may have an extra trainer sitting around that they'll let you use for a race, nothing wrong with that. If you can find somebody, especially if you have a local triathlon group in your area, I would consider joining that group and then making some connections there, because sometimes people will, get smart trainers and then they'll still have like their normal trainer, and maybe they'd be willing to let you borrow it for, your training period, for 8 weeks. Say, hey, can I borrow a trainer for 8 weeks and I'll give it back to you when I'm done? That seems reasonable. And I think most people would do that. So, training early in the morning, or once everybody is kind of settled down and the house is kind of settled down and kids may be in bed, then would be a great time to say, let's go ahead and, I'll get my workout in. You can either, reserve that for, bikes and runs and things, but, swims are a little bit more challenging because you have to physically go somewhere for a swim. So there's, that's something that you'd have to tweak in how you structure your week. But those two things are things that I did often when I was training. I was common up early in the morning to do my workout. It was over and done with. I'm more of a morning person than I am an evening person. And so, I checked that box and I didn't have to, try and motivate myself in the evening to do a workout after having a long, stressful day of life. So super helpful. Next one is combine family time with active time. So I've worked with athletes where, they may have a small children. And so, the athlete would go out for a run and the kid would ride their bike right beside the parent while they ran. And so I think that that's a great way for your child to see the importance of what you're doing, and it makes them feel involved and they're with you at the times. It's awesome. I highly recommend that. Schedule longer weekend sessions early so that you're fully present the rest of the day. So that was something that kind of ties back to the first one that I gave was, if you start to step up into the Olympic now, your sessions may be a little bit longer. And so it's easier to schedule those longer sessions in the weekend and especially earlier in the day, so that the rest of the day you have available to family and, life. So if there's one thing that I can say is that there's no badge of honor for missing important life moments just to get a training session in, or a race at that, for that matter. Triathlon should help you become stronger and a more engaged and energized parent, but not an absent one. So I hope that some of those ideas will help you come to the conclusion that this is something that you can do. And you can do it in a way that fits into your life, shares the experiences with others, and if you're a parent, teaches your child the value of setting goals and working towards something and making them a part of it. The second scenario is somebody who travels frequently for work. I do have athletes that have to do this from time to time. There are things that I do as a coach that accommodate for this, but I don't want to specifically talk about the way that we would structure training plans to accommodate for, like a particular travel scenario. But there are things that we can do. But I'm just going to give you some general overall tips on what you can do. So, what I would suggest first off is research hotel gyms in advance. So, if you know that you're going to be out of town and you found the hotel, I would give them a call or get on their website, see if they have a hotel gym, if they have a treadmill, an elliptical, or what are like a stationary bike or something that's in there, maybe a weight set, something that you can use in that gym so that you can get a workout in. Next one is if you are blessed with a gym membership already, and some of these gyms are like nationwide chain gyms, then see if there's a location at your destination that you can use. That's way more helpful than some of the hotel gyms that I've seen. So if you have that opportunity and you're blessed with that, then take advantage of it. That's something that I highly recommend. I would suggest planning out safe running routes wherever your destination is. This is a great way to be able to explore the surrounding area. If you don't have that ability to kind of plan them out ahead of time, I would almost guarantee that the concierge at the hotel or somebody working the front desk can tell you what roads that you should and shouldn't run on, what areas you should and shouldn't go to. I think that they would be willing to do something like that if you don't have that ability to plan ahead of time. There's tons of apps out there that you can plan running routes and things, and you can have it loaded on your phone and send it to your watches and stuff like that. So that's something that I would recommend. If you have to keep sessions short and focused when the time is limited, if you have a really busy day because you're at a conference or something like that, or you're meeting with clients, maybe find some of those shorter training sessions that are in your week and move things around to accommodate that. So if you don't have time for, a 45-minute run, but you have time for a 30-minute run and you have both of those in your plan, then switch them and do the 30-minute run on the day that you're more limited. Again, this flexibility within the plan has to be there if you have these particular unique lifestyles. You could also opt for making these time periods like, quote unquote, like a rollback week. And a rollback week is when you have your training volume and you're growing, there are moments in time where we have to roll back that volume. We have to decrease volume. So we're decreasing the time or the miles that we're putting on to give our body a chance to kind of do a little bit of recovery. We're trying to shed a little bit of this fatigue. You can make these quote unquote lighter weeks the week that you would be traveling. And sometimes it frees up and your time, makes you a little less nervous and a little less anxiety on like trying to get stuff done and still be doing what it is that you need to do while you're traveling. So your progress towards race day is not destroyed by having a lighter week. Even if it's not a rollback week, but you know that you're going to be traveling, you're just like, I don't have the time for this particular week. Let's kind of decrease that training volume by 25%, and now I'm only doing 75% of what it is that the plan says, but that fits better. Losing that 25% is not going to make or break your race day. And if anything, it's going to improve it because now you're less stressed, you're able to recover, and it fits better. And so when all those things are in harmony, I believe that, you are better prepared for race day because of it. So to finish off, I would say that we start small so that we can stay steady. Right? That's where I'm trying to take you as a new beginner athlete is I want you to learn this confidence that you get from being consistent. Find one more piece to the puzzle. That does huge amounts for your confidence and your ability to feel prepared for race day. Because right now, as a beginner, your goal is to finish your race, feel confident when you get up to that starting line. I want you to enjoy the training process. So enjoy the 8 weeks or however many weeks that you're training. I want you to enjoy that time because you learn a lot about yourself during that time than you do on race day, without a doubt. I've experienced that myself, that I learned way more about myself during the training than I ever did on race day, and both were successful. So I want you to enjoy this journey, and I want you to keep going, not just because, I'm a coach and, my job is dependent on the health and longevity of the sport, but I want you to keep going because I know what comes of that as you continue to do things that you never thought that you could do before. And you start to gain this confidence. Man, I know how that feels. And I want you to feel that. That's one of the reasons that I became a coach, is because I lived that experience and I continue to live this experience today, even after over a decade of doing this sport and being a coach and working with a number of different athletes, all different lifestyles, all different abilities, different points in their journey. The confidence and the positive experiences that they get from this journey far outweighs any kind of medal that you get from crossing that finish line. I remember when I finished my first triathlon, I crossed that line and I said, man, that was really hard, but I loved it. I had a blast. I proved this to myself that I can do this. And my next question was, what's next? So if I can bring you to that point where you cross that finish line, you're like, man, that was hard. There were times where I didn't think I was going to be able to do this, but I did this. And now I know I can do it and I know I can do more. So what's next? Then my job has been done. That is what I want for you as a new athlete into this sport. And if there's anything that I can do to help you along that journey, I hope that you will reach out and, ask questions all the time. That's the one thing that I encourage my athletes to do with me, is that I want them to ask me. There are times where I kind of ask leading questions in order to get a question back from them, because I want to convey this wisdom to them. Because if I can get them to make wise and good decisions on the race course, then that's my job. That's what I want for them. I want them to be able to think and execute and gain that confidence. So there's nothing wrong with starting small, as we've talked about in episode 1. There's nothing easy about a sprint, and it's not any more impressive by doing a longer race. What is impressive is you picking the race that fits your lifestyle and that you can execute the training plan for. That's what's impressive. Other stuff comes later. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon. I've been your host, Coach Justin. I'm head coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode, I hope that you will consider leaving a review, leaving a comment. If you want, ask questions. This is posted up on YouTube and Spotify and all kinds of other different platforms. So wherever it is that you're consuming this content from, leave a question. If you have a question, leave a question. I monitor it all. If you're not following us on the socials, we are out on Instagram, Facebook as well. So check us out there. I'm pushing out content all the time out on the YouTube channel as well. Go to tabularasaracing.com and you can check out all the content that's in there, previous blog episodes, other videos that I've done. So again, thank you guys for listening. If you're checking this out on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, click subscribe. Don't miss an episode. Go to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast website, and you can check out our entire library of past episodes. Give those a listen, find something that you've got questions on, and check it out. So thank you guys again for the time that you've spent with me. I really appreciate it. It does not go unappreciated and unnoticed. So again, thank you guys. Again, I've been your host, Coach Justin, head coach of Tabula Rasa Racing, and happy training, everyone, and see you next time. That's it for today's episode of Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an Endurance Athlete Journey podcast series. Remember, you don't need to have everything figured out right now. Progress in triathlon comes from consistency, patience, and taking the right next step. If something you heard today sparked a question or gave you a little more confidence, that means you're moving in the right direction. Stick with this series as we continue breaking down triathlon one step at a time, building confidence before distance, and focusing on a process that actually fits real life. Until next time, trust the process, keep showing up, and remember, you're becoming an endurance athlete long before you ever cross that finish line.